There was a time in my life when everything seemed perfect. I had a good job, a comfortable home, and a loving family. My finances were stable, and I never worried about the future. I could afford the little luxuries that made life enjoyable: dinners out, vacations, and gifts for my loved ones. It was a life of contentment, and I felt secure in the knowledge that I had built a solid foundation for myself and my family. But life has a way of shifting beneath our feet when we least expect it. My descent into financial ruin began slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. It started with a few unexpected expenses: a medical bill here, a car repair there. Nothing I couldn't handle, or so I thought. But then, the company I had worked for over a decade announced layoffs. I remember sitting in that sterile gray office as my boss delivered the news. The words hit me like a ton of bricks, knocking the wind out of me. "We're sorry, but we have to let you go." I left that office in a daze, my mind racing with worry. I had some savings, but how long would it last? How would I provide for my family? I tried to stay positive, telling myself that I would find another job quickly. But as weeks turned into months and rejections piled up, my confidence began to erode. The bills didn't stop coming, and my savings dwindled with each passing day. I started to panic. Desperation led me to make poor financial decisions, taking out high interest loans, dipping into my retirement savings, and even selling off personal belongings. Each decision was made in the hope that it would buy me more time, but it only pushed me further into the abyss. My once comfortable life had turned into a nightmare of mounting debts and endless worry. The situation spiraled out of control. I found myself drowning in debt, unable to see a way out. Creditors called constantly, their voices cold and unyielding, demanding money I didn't have. I could see the strain it was putting on my family. My spouse tried to be supportive, but the stress was taking its toll on our relationship. We argued more, tension simmering just beneath the surface. The worst part was the shame. I felt like a failure, like I had let everyone down. I stopped going out, avoided friends and family, and isolated myself. I didn't want anyone to know how bad things had gotten. The nights were the hardest. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with fear and anxiety. The future, once so bright, now looked bleak and uncertain. I hit rock bottom one evening as I sat alone in the darkened living room. The house was silent, my family already in bed. I looked around at the home I had worked so hard to build, now in danger of being taken away. Tears welled up in my eyes as I thought about losing everything. I felt utterly defeated, as though there was no way out of the hole I had dug myself into. In that moment of despair, a thought crossed my mind, one that scared me deeply. I began to wonder if it would be easier to just end it all. The thought of leaving my family behind, of being free from the crushing burden of debt, seemed almost appealing in my desperation. But something held me back. A small, still voice deep within me whispered, "This is not the end. Hold on." That voice was the first glimmer of hope I had felt in months. It was faint, almost drowned out by the noise of my despair, but it was there. I didn't know where it came from, but I clung to it like a lifeline. That night, I prayed for the first time in years. I didn't know what else to do. I cried out to God, asking for help, for guidance, for anything that would pull me out of the darkness. I didn't expect an answer, but in the days that followed, something began to shift. It was as if my prayer had opened a door, allowing a ray of light to pierce the gloom that had settled over my life. I began to feel a sense of calm that I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't that my problems disappeared overnight. They were still there, looming large, but I no longer felt completely alone in facing them. One morning, after another sleepless night, I felt an urge to visit a small church near my home. It was a place I had passed by countless times but had never entered. I wasn't even sure why I was drawn there, but something compelled me to go. I walked through the doors and sat in one of the back pews, hoping to go unnoticed. The church was quiet, with only a few people scattered throughout. As I sat there, a sense of peace washed over me. The stillness of the place, the soft light filtering through the stained glass windows, and the faint scent of incense in the air all combined to create an atmosphere of serenity. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of release, as though the heavy burden I had been carrying was beginning to lift. As I sat there, lost in thought, the pastor approached me. He was an older man with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. He introduced himself and asked if I was okay. At first, I didn't know what to say, but something about his presence made me feel safe. I found myself pouring out my heart to him, telling him about my financial troubles, my fears, and the darkness that had taken hold of my life. He listened quietly, without judgment, and when I finished, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "You are not alone in this," he said softly. "God is with you, even in your darkest moments. Trust in him, and he will guide you through this storm." That conversation marked the beginning of my journey back from the brink. I started attending church regularly, finding comfort in the community and the teachings. The pastor's words stayed with me, a reminder that I was not alone. I began to pray more, not just for myself, but for my family, asking God to give us strength and guidance. It wasn't easy. There were still days when I felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of my problems, but I started to approach them differently. Instead of trying to tackle everything on my own, I began to lean on my faith. I realized that I didn't have to have all the answers. I just needed to trust that God had a plan for me, even if I couldn't see it yet. Slowly, things began to improve. I started to find odd jobs here and there, enough to keep us afloat. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I also reached out to a financial counselor, something I had been too ashamed to do before. Together, we came up with a plan to start chipping away at the debt. It was a long road, but I no longer felt like I was walking it alone. I also began to notice changes in myself. The fear and anxiety that had once consumed me began to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence. I started to see opportunities where before I had only seen obstacles. My relationship with my family began to heal as well. We started communicating more openly, supporting each other through the tough times. One day, as I was going through the mail, I received an unexpected letter. It was from an old friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Inside was a check, with a note saying that they had heard about my struggles and wanted to help. I was stunned. It was enough to cover one of our biggest debts, a huge weight off my shoulders. I couldn't believe it. It felt like a miracle, a tangible sign that God was watching over us. I felt a surge of gratitude, not just for the financial help, but for the reassurance that I was on the right path. I was beginning to understand that God's help didn't always come in the form of a dramatic rescue. Sometimes it was the small, unexpected blessings that made the biggest difference. As time went on, I continued to work hard to rebuild our finances. It was a slow process, but I was no longer focused on the end goal. Instead, I took things one day at a time, trusting that each step forward, no matter how small, was bringing me closer to stability. But more than the financial recovery, I was finding something even more valuable: hope. I began to see that my worth wasn't tied to my bank account or my material possessions. I started to focus on what truly mattered: my faith, my family, and the love we shared. The financial crisis, as painful as it had been, had stripped away the superficial things in my life, revealing what was truly important. There were still challenges, of course, but now, when faced with obstacles, I didn't feel overwhelmed by them. I knew that I had the strength to overcome whatever came my way, not because of my own abilities, but because I was no longer carrying the burden alone. I had placed my trust in God, and He was guiding me through the storm. Looking back, I realized that the financial ruin I had experienced wasn't the end of my life. It was a turning point. It forced me to reevaluate my priorities, to lean on my faith, and to find strength in places I hadn't looked before. It was through that dark period that I learned the true meaning of trust and hope. Today, our finances are stable again, but more importantly, our lives are richer in ways that money could never buy. We are closer as a family, more resilient, and more grateful for the blessings we have. And I have a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that no matter what challenges come our way, we will face them together with God's help. I share my story not to dwell on the hardships, but to offer hope to others who might be going through a similar struggle. If you're facing financial ruin or any kind of crisis, know that you are not alone. There is always hope, even in the darkest of times. Trust in God, lean on your faith, and know that He is with you, guiding you through the storm. No matter how bleak things may seem, there is always a way forward. Sometimes that way is revealed in the most unexpected places, in the quiet of a church, in the words of a kind stranger, or in the small, everyday miracles that remind us that we are not alone. Hold on to that hope and know that with God's help, you can overcome anything. In the end, my story is not just about financial recovery. It's about finding hope and strength in the face of adversity. It's about learning to trust in a higher power, even when everything seems to be falling apart. And it's about discovering that the true wealth in life is not measured in dollars and cents, but in the love, faith, and hope that sustain us through our darkest days.